So not a great start. It is Tuesday, July 25th, 2023 at 2 p.m. for the Committee of the Whole. I'm Councillor Chris Pettingill. As acting mayor for July, I am chairing this meeting. Start us off with Holland Squalin Quist Licknamatla Squamish Okmeo. Welcome to the Squamish Nation Traditional Territory. Mike. Please be advised that this council meeting is being live streamed, recorded, and will be available to the public to view on the District of Squamish website following the meeting. If you if you have concerns, please notify the corporate officer present at the meeting. We're having some sound difficulties. I think those are taken care of now. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Councillor French, second by Councillor Stoner. All those in favor? Motion, anyone opposed? Motion carries. And I will turn it over before I make more mistakes to Ms. McJannet to talk about the Mamquam blind channel.
Thank you so much, Council. Just one moment, getting this PowerPoint up. Russell, I need your help. Thank you. Hello, Squamish Council and community tuning in. My name is Sarah McJannet, a community planner. With me, I have David Roulston, manager of municipal infrastructure and co-lead on the project, and also Daniel Leonard, who's vice president of Westmar Advisors. It's a firm specializing in coastal engineering and marine infrastructure projects who's been engaged on this project. So today, our purpose is to present an early draft of the Mamquam Blind Channel Maintenance Strategy to solicit comment from council on our work to date prior to seeking broader community input. And so we'll situate this, the strategy, speak briefly to the work plan and our engagement activities since we introduced the project to you last April. And we'd like to summarize the draft strategy formation, including guiding principles, review of channel maintenance options and funding tools, and then talk to the preferred options that are emerging from our discussions with our community working group, as well as cost estimates for maintenance work. So as noted in the staff report, we are next, we're aiming to engage with the broader community, and we've shared some next steps for additional activities before developing final recommendations and bringing the strategy back to council in the fall. So in 2016, the OCP update identified several policies and guidelines for channel maintenance, dredging, and restoration. You can see policy 20.24E, which set intention to address navigability for transportation access, recreation, and commerce while minimizing impacts. And then further to that, leading scoping and collaboration around a channel maintenance strategy was also identified and prioritized in our marine action strategy in 2018. In terms of the project focus, again, it's to support navigation safety, accessibility, habitat and coastal protection and restoration, as well as community, cultural, and regional economic vitality of our marine gateway. You can see the Divine Study area here, which extends from the southern tip of the oceanfront lands up to the CN Rail Bridge, which is the northern extent of the scheduled navigable waterway under the Canadian Navigable Waters Protection Act. And this is also the area in which we established a designated navigation channel in 2017. I also just wanted to highlight that the channel maintenance study area is on the doorstep of Squamish Village and community where the Squamish River estuary drains into the Mamquam Blind Channel. So the updated area in blue shows the Squamish Nation's expanded lands at Squamish that were legally transferred to the nation in 2021 through the addition to reserve process. And in the draft strategy, we have highlighted the cultural significance and importance of the channel to the Squamish people, where many known seasonal village sites were located and many marine resources were abundant. The Squamish Nation has a strategic plan that includes goals for protecting and managing their lands and waters, including protecting against loss of reserve land from erosion and supporting environmental restoration and sustaining the community. And the nation is also, as we presented in the Marine Action Strategy, sorry, not the Marine Action Strategy, the Marine Access Review last month, there's significant comprehensive land, marine, and capital planning that the nation is getting underway for Squamish and Site B to the south, which is also owned by the nation. And so we've been engaging Squamish Nation staff to staff through this project. And we look forward to continued collaborative work. And we hope that this work will also help connect with and support the nation's future planning and potential for partnership in future as well. And that's just an image of Squamish and Site B from the nation's website. Okay, so in terms of project stages and key tasks, we're in stage 4 of our original project work plan that we presented. Initial stage 1, as you know, involved the scoping, procuring technical services of Westmar and engagement planning. Stage 2 is all about data gathering and preliminary technical review, review of the bathymetric information, sediment quality data, the navigation channel design, vessel considerations, etc. In stage 3, through the end of 2022 and earlier this year, we engaged Squamish Nation, other governments, and our community working group in technical review of data and approaches and potential dredging opportunities. And as part of this stage, we also talked about benefits and impacts of dredging, as well as what happens if we do nothing. In stage 4, we've assembled this draft report with maintenance and long-term funding strategies for your initial review to talk about initial directions, and then forthcoming input from council today and from community will help inform how to address dredging and channel enhancement options going forward. And then in stage 5, we're going to summarize all the final recommendations and bring that back in the fall. So a big shout out to our working group, which was formed last summer. Many of them are here with us today in the audience. And so we have a total of 17 members, so a larger group than we had initially set out to include, but it was fantastic to have all of the participation. And you can see the members of the working group here in terms of their affiliation in the groups from the terms of reference. We held 3 hybrid in-person and virtual meetings to review the strategy scope, all the baseline technical information, and to hear their perspectives and priorities for channel maintenance. So in the first session, that was October of 2022, we reviewed a lot of that baseline foundation information. In the second session, we walked through and evaluated preliminary options and costing. And then in the third session, we reviewed and discussed funding approaches, case studies for disposal of dredged material and beneficial reuse of sediments, as well as our financial context for the municipality. So in the discussion draft, this shows the content and how it's been brought together. And so the strategy is outlining our channel maintenance needs, the context for the channel, objectives, guiding principles, as well as inputs on the maintenance options and funding tools and approaches. We're just going to quickly touch on some of those just key points and components of the strategy in the remaining slides before opening up to council for questions and comments. And so I just wanted to really highlight with these images that the strategy is attempting to highlight a very dynamic history and context for Mamquam Blind Channel on the ecological, the cultural, the community importance of the channel as a gateway. It's a natural asset. It holds a lot of community value, and it remains relevant as a working waterfront and provides tidewater access to many important uses, and as well as multimodal connections for broader economic activities. There have been a lot of past dredging campaigns that are detailed in the strategy and community advocacy by the chamber that requesting provincial and federal and municipal action and support for channel maintenance activity. And That advocacy was really important, and there's a continued opportunity for advocacy, which we've highlighted in the council report, and I'll speak to later. In terms of draft guiding principles with the working group, based on perspectives, we did put together 9 draft guiding principles that we'd love to hear from council, whether those hit the mark. And so they're listed here. Essentially, it's really highlighting and acknowledging the cultural and ecological importance of the lands and waters in the channel, respect for Squamish Aweo Meo. I'm working on that. Rights and title, advancing reconciliation, progressively restoring channel health, preserving safe access, prioritizing waterway safety, and finding a program that's sustainable, practical, and financially viable, designing for future needs, especially in light of climate shifts and new marine opportunities. And then also the principle around ensuring benefits and costs are shared amongst the broadest group of beneficiaries in the community. So that's the guiding principles in a nutshell. And I'll just turn it over to David just to walk through a couple of other salient points as well.
Thanks, Sarah. So this figure shows the existing channel depths with darker blue indicating areas with deeper water. And of note is the significant pinch point at the mouth of the Squamish River. Due to the limited depths, the navigation channel depth and width does not meet the standard for two-way small boat traffic within a protected waterway. And this is a picture of that pinch point, and with a note that the bar is extending into the channel, and there has apparently been some recent movement within that area. So in order to determine an appropriate design depth of the channel, Westmar reviewed vessels that use the channel along with their under keel clearance, which is the clearance between the deepest portion of the boat and the channel bed. Various dredge depths were evaluated to determine what % of the time those vessels can safely navigate the channel. And based on that review, it was determined that a dredge depth of -2.6 meters chart datum would allow the largest vessel that uses the channel to safely navigate about 85% of the time. And to achieve that depth through the whole Mamquam blind channel would require a total dredge volume of 68,000 cubic meters. So we have collated sediment data from past data collection exercises, including the 2013 dredging program that the district undertook, as well as testing from some private water lot owners. And the findings of that review indicate that some areas have mercury and hydrocarbons based on past industrial use, and all areas have elevated copper, which is a result of Britannia Beach mining activities over the past century. The areas with mercury and hydrocarbons will require sediment to be disposed at a certified landfill, and disposal at sea may be possible for areas that are free of mercury and hydrocarbons, but engagement with federal regulators is required to confirm that. Disposal on land is also considered viable, particularly for near shore sites where sodium and chloride are not expected to have any adverse effects. And so disposal on land could take place in the form of land raising, land creation, or potential habitat compensation work within intertidal areas. The project team evaluated a full range of options to assist with decision-making, and this included doing nothing, just status quo, a stopgap, which is focusing dredging work at the mouth of the Squamish River, a focus dredge, which would dredge the southern portion of the channel, so that's south of the proposed pedestrian bridge, to a depth of -2.6, and then north of the pedestrian bridge to -1.6. The option D is to dredge the entire channel to -2.6, and then the highest service level is to dredge the entire channel to -3.2, which would allow all vessels to navigate during all tidal conditions. So option B and C were identified as the preferred options by the working group. And I can go into further detail on those two options. So option B, the stopgap, is shown here. And again, it's focusing work at the mouth of the Squamish, which is currently the key pinch point. The order of magnitude cost estimate for that is $650,000. That's based on a number of assumptions that will need to be confirmed at the detailed design stage for items like how we dispose of the dredge material and what's required from a habitat compensation perspective. So this option would address the biggest pinch point in the channel right now with an aim to improving navigation at low tides. This slide just provides some further details on option B. The key notes are that the estimated volume is 5,000 cubic meters at an estimated cost of $650,000. This would benefit all users of the channel, given its location fairly far south in the channel. It is considered a shorter term benefit due to the limited dredge volume and also because of its location at the mouth of the Squamish River, which is continually producing sediment at about 2,500 cubic meters per year. So it's notable that this is not a full service option, and there are opportunity costs and risks with not proceeding with a more comprehensive option, which includes reduced marine access that will limit economic potential. And there will also remain risk for marine accidents due to the reduced width of the channel that would be achieved with this limited option. Option C is the focus dredge, and that's shown in hatching on this slide. So this is slightly or a significantly expanded option beyond the stopgap. Most of the dredging area is in the southern portion of the channel with a limited portion towards the north end of the channel near the CN rail bridge. So some highlights of option C are it includes a total volume of about 55,000 cubic meters at an estimated cost of $3.5 million. This option would benefit existing and future marinas within the channel, recreational users, and marine industrial users. This option also doesn't provide a full level of service for all users, so there would be some opportunity costs associated with reduced marine access, again, including reduced economic potential. With that, I'll hand it back to Sarah to discuss Squamish Nation feedback.
Thanks, David. So as mentioned, we've engaged staff to staff with Squamish Nation through the formal referrals process. And we've held staff to staff meetings. And then in addition to that, Squamish Nation staff actually joined an in-person working group meeting with the larger working group, which was great. In terms of the review of the options, option C has been highlighted for us by the nation as being seen as the option that viewed as the middle ground and the best option to balance kind of environmental needs with the consideration for costing and also for the actual cost benefit. They're very interested in seeing beneficial reuse of uncontaminated material rather than disposal at sea, and have highlighted a focus on the Squamish area and the estuary area for restoration. They liked the idea of keeping materials close, and also highlighted that there's a fill potential for various sites to be evaluated. Also, the nation highlighted the importance of archaeological assessment prior to any works along the shorelines, and the interest in seeing mitigations to reduce impacts on the ecology of the area. So using measures such as silt curtains and things to avoid impacts to fisheries. They also have a ACE monitoring program. So that's Squamish Nation Archaeology, Culture and Environment team that they employ. And so they often highlight the opportunities there to engage in project work. So we're going to go back to some of the costing assumptions, and I'll just turn it over to Daniel to highlight those for us.
So there's several variables and uncertainty related to the costs, which we've done our best to assess at this point with appropriate contingencies. One is how much of the material is actually contaminated and can't be disposed of at sea and can't be disposed of for beneficial reuse and has to be taken to a landfill. So we have the historic data that's been taken from various projects along the channel, and we've tried to assess appropriate levels of contamination and uncontaminated materials. But again, until you actually go and do a drilling program, you won't know the exact amount of contamination. As was mentioned, the requirements to achieve approval for disposal at sea are getting harder, and the likelihood of getting approval is going down. So we can't really say at this point whether we would get approval for disposal at sea for this project. And if we don't, then all of the material would have to go on land, either for beneficial reuse, either contaminated or uncontaminated landfill. We feel very more certain about the actual cost of doing the dredging. You know, we've worked with industry partners. We have several projects on the go right now. So our level of certainty with respect to actually doing the dredging is much higher than these other issues that I mentioned. And there actually may be some benefits from an approval standpoint to creating habitat areas with the dredgate to create more of a win-win with the project rather than just dredging, having beneficial reuse and habitat offsetting. There will be some level of habitat offsetting, which again, we won't know until we know the value of the marine habitat that's there. Because the channel hasn't been dredged in over 10 years, that means that you do have to offset. This is not considered maintenance dredging from a permitting perspective. This is a new dredging project because it's been more than 10 years since the last time dredging occurred. And then this is an example of how dredging can be used to create new habitat. This is in North Vancouver. The picture on the right is in North Vancouver. The picture on the left is in Victoria. And the cross section of the bottom is related to the picture in North Vancouver, where you create habitat benches and you take the dredgate and you create benches and you do planting to promote marine habitat and also spaces for fish and other invertebrates to live.
Okay. So the project team, in consultation with the finance department, has reviewed available funding options. There is a notable absence of dedicated federal and provincial funding for navigational maintenance outside of major harbors and ports, and dredging hasn't historically been the requirements of local governments. So that leaves a gap in funding, which is a primary reason why work hasn't been completed in recent years. And layered onto that are the significant financial pressures facing the district, as discussed this morning, based on funding shortfalls identified in the asset management plan, which challenges the district to make significant investments in dredging. Based on the review that the project team has completed, funding approaches that are recommended for further examination include a local service area tax for specific properties that would benefit, user fees and charges, voluntary contributions from users of the channel. We would, of course, pursue any available federal and provincial grants. However, those are uncertain. And the final is an annual budget allocation, which would likely only be suitable for smaller amounts, such as the stopgap or for maintenance dredging. For each of the preferred options, the project team intends to complete further analysis prior to completion of this strategy based on council sentiment. And so that would include grant funding if available, a local service area, which could range in funding anywhere from 0 to 100% of costs. The same with general taxation, which could be a component of funding ranging anywhere from 0 to 100% of costs. And then there are other potential funding sources that I mentioned, like user fees and voluntary contributions from different users.
So in terms of next steps with this project, as mentioned, we're in the stage 4 of 5. Following this council touch point today and soliciting input from council at this stage, we'd like to move forward with some additional public engagement beyond just the member, not just, but beyond the members of our working group. broader community engagement activities would help us raise awareness and inform the wider community about the considerations and the technical aspects of channel maintenance works. And then also would allow us to consult on the options and the impacts involved, including environmental and fiscal impacts, and then also to discuss some of those financial contribution scenarios. We envision some fun engagement activities, as mentioned, in tandem with the marine access review that we presented last month. We'd like to do several community in-person pop-ups in August and September, an online survey, and more direct outreach efforts. And again, that key focus will be to collect community perspectives on funding, as also to get perspectives on the value, the costs, and the benefits of channel maintenance, and expectations from the community around accessibility and enhanced service on that front. Also in the report, we highlighted an example. I know that council is often asking about, if there's any opportunity for advocacy or discussion, which is highly appreciated. Additional engagement and advocacy was highlighted for senior government to discuss the prospect of greater collaboration on long-term local channel maintenance program planning and funding. So we brought an example from the city of Delta, and there's a link in this staff report. Delta has called on, in tandem with Richmond, but Delta is really seeming to take the lead, calling to the federal and provincial governments to work with local stakeholders to develop a framework and funding model for long-term sustainable local channel maintenance. So we wanted to highlight that for council, and certainly if there are opportunities, that might be a good place to go. And subject to council support for public engagement, in terms of next steps, we would be posting the draft, the discussion draft to the project page, and also creating a Let's Talk Squamish small engagement hub for this engagement, and also facilitate continued intergovernmental engagement and outreach with the working group prior to summarizing that engagement and recommendations to come back to council. So the recommendation and the motions in the council report today are that the District of Squamish receive the Mamquam Blind Channel Maintenance and Funding Strategy Discussion Draft document and provide feedback on the draft principles, options, and funding considerations as presented in the July 25th staff report. And secondly, that the district directs staff to solicit comment from the community on the discussion draft prior to bringing back the strategy to council for further discussion. So we'll pause there for your questions and then open up for some discussion. Thank you so much.
Mayor Herford.
Thank you for all the work that's gone into this so far. I was wondering, sorry, there was many images that had the depths overall, but what's the state of the portion that we under option C we wouldn't be touching, like, and where does that sit in relation to the goal that we have for that sort of swinging for the fences option that does everything?
I'll just go back to the image on this slide. That's one more. There we go.
Oh.
And two more. There we go. And so just for context, this shows this doesn't show the entire channel all the way up to the rail bridge. And just for clarity through the chair, are you referencing the area north of the Victoria Street right of way, north of the future bridge?
Yes, north of the future bridge, and the future bridge is essentially the boundary of option C, right? Is that correct?
Option C is inclusive of areas to the north of the bridge as well as the south of the bridge. So I'll just go back to option C, that's probably the better image there. And there's option C. So you can see the south channel, the base, and then this is the north channel all the way up to past Newport Marina. So the area in the area. This would include the focus dredge at the pinch point near the Squamish, and then also areas in the north that are above negative 1.6 meters. I'll let David speak to that a little bit more.
Yeah, through the chair, you can see north of the pedestrian bridge that the area that would be higher than minus 1.6 is pretty limited. So generally, there are better depths in the northern portion of the channel than there are in the southern portion.
Yeah, thank you. I think under this, the piece I was missing was the hash marked bits in the north channel, just sort of the problem pieces. So, okay, that was the clarity I was looking for. Thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Ms. McJannet. I really did appreciate the references to the Fraser River activities, and I'm going to quote from the Delta report. Quote, "To see what could be done to reduce the amount of sediment being deposited in the local channels," unquote. Well, their situation is somewhat different, but if we translate that to the Mamquam channel, the issue is the Squamish, the Squamish River. We used to call it the Squamish. And to quote your report, upwards of 2,500 cubic meters of sediment per year coming down that river. I can remember as far back as Chuck Billy and Randall Lewis more recently being very interested in the prospects of harvesting that as a means of controlling that amount of sediment. And there's been various schemes to do that. My question is, has that been considered? I don't see attention to that scheme or strategy that the Delta folks have explored in this present report. Has it been considered? Can it be considered within the ballpark of, well, longer term strategy?
Thank you so much for the question. And so through the chair, the sort of the idea of analyzing opportunities to mitigate the amount of sediment that's coming down into the channel is something that has been looked at, discussed more high level. It's on the radar, but essentially the example on the Fraser, what they did was they undertook some some more modeling to basically assess what are the measures that they could put in place to reduce the amount of sediment. And so they had a bunch of different structures and facilities to reduce that sediment from getting down into the navigational channel areas. With our strategy, we've highlighted that as an example, but we haven't done or have not assigned any budget towards any major modeling on that front at this time. I'm just going to ask Daniel Leonard if there's any additional insights that he'd like to provide on that, just based on the Fraser example.
Through the chair, I guess you're looking at many years of modeling and permitting because it is so much more difficult to get approval for those types of structures. You look at the Fraser River, there's what's called training walls, the big walls that are trying to increase the current speed in the main part of the river to transfer more sediment through the middle of the river. So it's all possible, but the amount of time to do the modeling and the several years of permitting could be a challenge for this project if you're looking to complete something in the next 5 years.
Thank you. My second question concerns the design parameters that come up in section 5.3 of the report. And there is a mention of a report called TIE Plan from 2018. And perhaps when you deliver the final report, you'll have an appendix with all of those, but that looks to be an interesting set of data. And I would like to know more about that. But at any rate, 2018 is significant for me because it's since 2018, we've had fairly substantial discussion of the potential of a ferry use, shallow draft ferries in the Mamquam Channel. And we had a ferry terminal at the mouth of the main street for over 20 years. My question is, should there be consideration of shallow draft ferry uses, and I do emphasize shallow draft, when we consider design parameters? And when we evaluate also your options D and E, which extend further up the channel and to different, well, depths, if you like. So that's my question. Should we be considering shallow draft ferries in the channel, and might that be a part of our design parameters? Thank you.
Thank you so much for the question and the consideration. So the tie plan report that you're referencing was work that was done in 2017, 2018, at the time that the pedestrian bridge design was underway. So as part of the Transport Canada approval for that project, a full kind of navigation channel assessment had to be done. It was also at the time when we were dealing with a lot of the derelict vessels within the channel. So it was an opportunity in working with Transport Canada and a number of the local waterfront owners to basically delineate that navigation channel. So that's at the time where the markers came in and the buoys were placed as well. That navigational assessment was really interesting. So we'd like to bring that into this strategy in a little bit more depth. There's a classification for the waterway and then ideal kind of widths for the transiting vessels and size. So essentially what we learned through that navigation assessment, it's a Class A channel, two-way channel that David was referencing. And certainly when it comes to the design vessels and shallow draft ferries, certainly that commercial and recreational boat traffic needs to be kind of considered. The navigational assessment identifies kind of current uses and use of the waterway, but we need to also be looking to the future. So we will definitely bring more specificity around those details for future uses, in alignment also with the marine zoning that was established that does allow for those types of passenger ferry type uses. David, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Or you're good? No.
Thank you. And of course, the marine zoning discussion, we did consider that for that particular district water lot. Finally, there's reference to special project funds of $50,000 to complete further sediment testing for contaminants to support a future channel maintenance application. Now, there's a number of acronyms in the report. One is PCOCs, another one is CSR standards. PCOCs being potential contaminants of concern. My question is, in the list that you showed in one of your slides, these are mainly heavy metals, so copper and mercury and ions, different categories, but not contaminants that are of concern to, for example, fisheries is, well, in front of the sawmill that was there for 40 years and two log dumps that were there for a lot longer was a mountain of bark underwater. That was all dredged up in 1986 and moved up the channel, dumped in the basin above the highway bridge and on land, and the slurry came back down into the basin in the upper channel. So that area still is contaminated by dredge spoil with heavily laden with organic material. My question, when we look for or determine which contaminants or what we're going to test for and we examine this sediments, should we consider this of obvious importance to fisheries is the biological oxygen demand that's created with this organic material that's very evident in the Upper Bland Channel today.
Right now, the list of contaminants that we would test for is highly guided by the disposal at sea requirements. That's basically what we're looking for. We could expand it, but I guess that's currently what the list of contaminants we're going for is to see whether we could meet a disposal at sea standard. And as I mentioned, that standard is evolving right now. There's other municipalities that have been able to dispose at sea in the past and have just been rejected. So the window of opportunity for that is closing rapidly.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
I have a couple questions myself, and just trying to wrap my head around. If we do options, say B, C, D, beyond, I gather in any case, the amount of new sediment is relatively constant. So am I out of line thinking that, say we proceed with one option and then after that, biannual maintenance might be roughly equivalent to option B, sort of every 2 years? Is that an unreasonable assumption in terms of order of magnitude?
And we don't have a baseline for the last time that the channel was fully dredged, but it is going to be somewhere around 5 to 10,000 cubic meters every couple of years that you'd have to do maintenance dredging. And by doing dredging more regularly, then you cut down on the permitting requirements, because if you dredge within 10 years, then you're doing maintenance dredging, you're not doing capital dredging. So the overall cost goes down if you're not having to get new permits every time.
Okay, thank you. And then I feel like this was maybe asked and answered the last time we spoke about this, but I don't remember. Does dredging the channel at any of the depths we're talking about have any impact on things like storm surge or our flood hazard management protection needs?
Through the chair, no, it would have no impact. The removal of sediment is basically insignificant in comparison with it wouldn't have any impact on the ocean levels.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair, just a few questions, especially as we go into public engagement. Ms. McJannet, I heard you say one of the things that we're looking for engagement on is to better understand the expectation of levels of service. I just want to be really cautious about our language there. As you mentioned, dredging is not typically a function that municipalities provide. I understand that there are some values in doing so. But there are a lot of cost pressures at the moment, and I appreciate in the report, the varying options for financial tools review. And there's no expectation, at least in this table at this point, that there's general property taxation used for the capital, but it has been identified potentially as a source of revenue for maintenance. I'm just wondering if staff can speak to why they think general taxation is a good or a potential revenue source for ongoing maintenance of channel dredging.
I can start, and Ms. Boxer, please interrupt or correct me if I'm wrong on anything. But generally speaking, it's considered general property taxation has been considered as a possible source of funding for maintenance because the costs of a maintenance program are typically lower. I think if we're looking at expenditures exceeding 1 million, then that's typically where we get into a situation of borrowing, which is probably not an attractive option really for the district. To be paying off a dredging with a limited time period for a much longer time period than you actually gain the benefit from it. So general property taxation could potentially be a source of funding for a lower option like the stopgap, because the cost of that option is $650,000. It's less than $1 million. So I think what we're trying to say is general property taxation is a possible funding source for smaller expenditures. But if we're looking at a major capital program, that it's probably not a suitable option.
And this might be a question through to Ms. Boxwood, but can somebody explain how a local service area or a specified area might apply here and how we would determine that?
Yes, thank you for the question through the chair. Typically, a local service area tax is only to be charged against those parcels that benefit. So you would have to go out, the process is you would have to go out with a request for a local service area tax, and there would be a petition of sorts. And yeah, the folks would have to agree to that. It isn't something that the district can impose on those parcels.
And is that similar to a specified area, so the one-time parcel tax?
Similar, yes.
Just before I go to Mayor Herford, a piece of clarification on these area taxes. Are they limited to contiguous parcels, or could we sort of say, you know, the proposed service area is anything zoned commercial within X hundred meters of the channel and excluding residential. Is that sort of definition possible, or it's got to be in this, in this polygon, that's where it is?
They don't have to be contiguous. However, it has to have an alignment with the a benefit. So that's the one critical piece that that parcel tax does have to have an alignment. Now, if we get into the nuance of whether or not some have that benefit and some do not, and whether we can pick and choose, we'd have to look into that further. My guess is probably not. But yeah, we'd absolutely look into it further.
Thanks, Mayor Herford.
Thank you. The image that showed the sort of underwater contours that can be achieved, I think is interesting for portions of the channel. But the portion right at the mouth of the Squamish, we know that a lot of material is coming out. We know the channel we'd like to maintain. How far back can we push to sort of add to the shelf life of this project, or how current it stands? I know that there's been discussion of gravel mining there essentially, and thinking that that might be an area where the sediment is more recent and potentially less contaminated. And how is that considered, and how has that been considered so far? And my other question was around frequency to keep the status of maintenance, but I think that's been answered. But how far back do you push to allow it to come in so that we get our frequencies right and we don't have a discomfort with a exceedingly narrower channel until we do the work again?
I'll make a couple comments and then invite David and Daniel to jump in as well. In terms of the area, if you think about the navigation channel, the defined navigational channel area, in that area, it's pretty much 30 meters across as you go down the channel from north to south. But in that area, it bumps out a little bit more. It's wider. But in terms of the dredge area, it's the dredge works and the design depths are within that area of travel, that navigation channel. And then you get into the water lots on the edges where there's activity and uses and leases and things like that. So just south of Squamish on that side, you've got the Site B and the on-water log storage activity, et cetera, that exists there. And then just beyond that, you also have kind of the outflow of the river, which is essentially a small estuary. And so I think it will continue to be a very delicate balancing act in terms of how can we serve or like create accessibility and safety for the navigation area without sort of like, and there is a little bit of overdredge, which is a technical term that I learned through this process that Daniel can speak to. But I think just on the edges, it's definitely about that balancing act in terms of the estuary habitat in that area beyond. And again, that's reserve area as well. And there is concern about continued erosion and then impacts to the estuary as well. I'll just turn to Daniel if you want to add anything about the actual dredge area and the overdredge and the sides, how that works.
I guess a lot of it is benefit for cost, because in many cases, doing detailed modeling would cost over $200,000, and we're only talking about $650,000 for the stopgap. So it's a case of, how much modeling do you want to do to assess what's the exact right amount? Whereas we have a good feel for if we dredge this area, it's going to clear it out, and at low tide, the current is going to move quicker through there, and it's going to keep it clear over time.
If I can follow up. So if the channel, we just use 30 meters as an example, then and then the taper happens from there. So we'll go out at whatever that slope is essentially what we end up with, and then the sediment will come in over time, or hopefully not with the higher pace, but that's the understanding. So we're not going 30 meters plus 30 meters in a slope just to buy us some space. That's not viable with the environmental concerns and just how this all works. Is that?
I mean, we have the expert right here. There actually is a narrow channel that is staying open right now. And a lot of times it's not possible because there's log booms or something that have floated in over top of the one little area that's open right now. So by just spreading that out a little bit wider would have a lot of benefit to the users.
So I have two more questions, and we are aiming to be done this discussion by 3. I think we're going to go a little bit long, but maybe we'll, after the 2 questions, go around clockwise. And I'm just wondering, unless someone asked for a different slide, Ms. McJannet, if you can put the principles up, because that's one of the things you're looking for commentary on. And in the meantime, I will go to Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. Through the chair, do we have any local service area taxation agreements in Squamish?
Thank you for the question. We just have the downtown BIA currently.
And second question, user fees and charges. Clearly, boat owners are very interested in having the channel dredged. People who don't own boats or don't use boats are not as interested. What is the sort of, but obviously there are side benefits of having a boating community. Sort of trying to get a grasp of the order of magnitude of user fees that would need to be applied. Are we talking about $1,000 to put your boat in the water, or are we talking about $10 to put your boat in the water?
Through the chair, that's a great question. We don't have a sense of what the magnitude of user fees would be. We have spoken to Steveston Harbor Authority, where they do levy a user fee, and that goes to a reserve for maintenance dredging. And I believe it's about 2 to 3% of their like moorage fees. Essentially, it's levied, if I'm not mistaken. But in terms of their dredging program, I think they're only building up a reserve of, like $100,000, if that. Like it takes a long time to build up a major reserve, and I just don't have the user fee piece is probably a small portion of the total cost and the ability to generate revenue, my guess. I've got the guiding principles back if there was a question about those or you wanted to see.
Thanks. I'll go to Councillor French.
Thanks, Chair. I have a memory, it's not a reliable one, of the developers of the oceanfront lands, Matthews West, possibly planning to do some dredging, or maybe being obligated to do some dredging as part of their work. How reliable is my memory on that?
Thank you for the question. I'm not aware of any obligation around dredging, but certainly in terms of the area along the west side of the channel, from that image that you could see where you can see the channel elevations, it's quite shallow in those areas. And so because those are outside of the navigation channel, we didn't include those in these estimates, but we do have sort of an estimate of how much, like that's a lot of material to dredge out there in some of those water lots. So we would consider that, and that's what we call secondary dredging. And there's opportunity that with future dredging works in some of these side channel areas in the water lots, in terms of the opportunity to combine works or share like mobilization costs in terms of partnership in future. That's something that has been identified as an opportunity, both with the industrial and as well as the marine commercial uses that we will see in the future.
Okay, so is staff aware of plans by Matthews West to do some dredging at some point in the future?
We're not aware of any current plans or in the near future around dredging. No.
Mayor Herford, I saw a hand. You're cutting into Councillor Anderson's comment time, so.
I'll be brief, I think. So the more fulsome option that we have, is that what we'd pursue from a permitting perspective, so that maintenance can sort of slowly over time chip away at that to avoid needing to do a capital dredge program or application for the pieces that we don't capture at this point? So we're ready to do that work, or how has that been approached, or how can we consider that so that we position ourselves strategically to achieve all those goals in the long term?
The regulators only care about area. They don't care about depth. So, yes, it probably would make sense to do a larger area for permitting approval, provided that you're not triggering a higher level of regulatory review by increasing the area. You have to find that balance of what is the right area to go with permitting.
Thank you. That helps.
We'll go around. If we can, try and keep our comments to 3 minutes each. And if council's amenable and we need to come around again, then maybe we can. But if we can stay focused, that'd be great. So I'll start with you, Councilor Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to first address the engagement activities plan. There's in August and early September, according to the report, is the plan and an online survey. For the Marine Access Review survey, I think it was only up for 3 weeks, and I kind of felt that there might have been benefit to leaving it up a little longer. I'm not sure, to catch some target sectors or actors, but this is possibly not a great time, August, early September, for community engagement. I'll leave that to staff to consider, and there may be various considerations to make, but it's not optimal time, it would seem to me. Site B is, of course, and that includes the potential future extension to the south of the built-up land area, is exempt from habitat compensation requirements under the Squamish Estuary Management Plan, which I know, Ms. McJannet, you have had that introduced into the OCP, and the review of the OCP included that detail. The habitat compensation seems to me is a very important consideration. If we can identify a strategy for utilizing that, perhaps we should give another look at options D and E. And what I have in mind is the Upper Mamquam Blind Channel and the sloughs all the way out to the CN rail track. Over the last couple of days, I've been taking pictures of the Buckley Avenue culvert. It's a mess. We're weeks away, days away from pink salmon coming up there, and they won't get through. There's a lot of work to be done in the old east branch of the river, Wilson Crescent Slough, Carson Place Slough, Upper Mamquam Blind Channel, and no money, obvious, to deal with it. So maybe there's a bigger picture factoring in a habitat compensation opportunity to do some restoration work in those upper waterways. The final suggestion I would make, the Squamish Chamber of Commerce delegation to a BC Chamber Convention 5 years ago brought dredging to the provincial venue. And we tried to get Fraser River to collaborate with us, and they wouldn't, especially Surrey Board of Trade. What we discovered is that they jealously guarded their turf, and they would not be very happy to see Squamish participate in a pitch to the feds for more money for dredging, because they want that money, to put it crudely. So we found at Kamloops at that convention that Nanaimo stepped forward as being very interested to work with Squamish on advocacy on dredging. And so I might suggest maybe it might be of interest to look abroad from the Fraser River to the island, perhaps Nanaimo, perhaps Cowichan Bay, where Squamish Terminals has an affiliate, to inquire about their experience and potential better sympathy for Squamish than we found with the big actors on the Fraser River. Thank you.
Councilor Greenlaw?
Thanks. I just have a couple comments to kind of build on some of the other comments that were made. I would be interested in getting an estimate of the volume of users, that are going through the channel, so that we could get a sense of what kind of financing we could reasonably ask from users that are currently using it. Similar to Councillor French's comments, I thought that there were some dredging requirements from either Sea and Sky and or Redbridge. And I'm not sure, I could be mistaken, but it'd be interesting to see if there's any commitments existing there. And to Councillor Anderson's comment about this not being a great time for public engagement, it might be a good time for at least monitoring users to determine how many people are going through, because it's, peak boating season. But yeah, thanks.
Mayor Herford?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for all the work. I learned lots through the reading of the documents and our conversation here today. I do think that the engagement period is actually could be pretty good for this group. This is when folks are out doing their using the channel, doing the boating, and that's although it might be maybe they want to be going doing that and not necessarily engaging, but at the same time, I think it's could be I could see the other option of waiting till winter on engagement to be really challenging to engage that group at that time. So I think this is I'm optimistic that will work. I do think that pursuing the largest area that we can from a permitting perspective could be an important piece strategically to ensure that as maintenance dredging happens over time, we can tackle those other areas, or at least stand a chance to be able to get there. And I really appreciate the highlighting the need for advocacy for funding support on these types of projects, and I'm happy to sort of take that on. And for users as a funding mechanism, I think that's absolutely something that should be explored. But I think I appreciate even when questioned here today, it was like, well, let's have some realistic expectations about what that can be. And I think about user fees in some of our other recreational areas, and even the fare box on the bus doesn't necessarily represent the hugest piece of the puzzle. So I think that I do think that some element of that is totally appropriate, but it needs to be we need to have reasonable expectations about what could be achieved through that mechanism. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. A couple quick thoughts. In my past news coverage of any dredging or maintenance activities in the Mamquam Blind Channel, I think that there's one consistent theme to that, and it's partnerships. Nobody ever gets anything done, or rarely gets anything done on their own in the Mamquam Blind Channel. It takes cooperation and collaboration amongst the many that have a connection to the channel. And I've heard a few times the idea of some kind of catchment area to trap sediment coming down the Squamish. And I think there's some merit to that. That anything that is prevented from entering the channel in such a catchment area, I think has potential revenue opportunities. The material has value. I'm a supporter of future user fees, whether that be in the form of some kind of fee to use future improved boat launch, or any other way to collect user fees out of the channel. And option C, as we've seen it presented in the report, I think lands us exactly where we need to be at this point. And I'm saying that as someone who wishes we could be doing more to remove the organic material out of the upper reaches of the Mamquam Blind Channel. But I think that is a nice to have, and option C really puts us in the need to have.
Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. So first, regarding principles, I think both staff and the consultant have done an excellent job on defining the objectives, the principles, and clearly putting forward a comprehensive view of all of the things we need to think about. For me, what would I like to see in the Mamquam Blind Channel? Option E, absolutely. The core draft guiding principle that in this seat I feel very responsible for, and particularly after this morning's meeting, is adopting long-term channel maintenance program that is sustainable, practical, and financially viable. And I hope that when we go to user engagement, public engagement, we spend some time asking public to reflect not just on what they want, but on how they would like it to be paid for. Because whether things come out of general taxation or out of user fees or other mechanisms is a big part of the picture. And it's on that financial viability that right now I would look at supporting option B until I understand a clearer picture on how the more extensive options can be funded. Thanks.
Councillor Stoner?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, just in terms of the points that you're looking for feedback on, I think the draft principles are good. We've seen these before, and I think that they continue to reflect the priorities within which I like to see this work move forward. There is one like small nuance in the last bullet point where it says explore partnerships and cost sharing opportunities wherever possible. And I think that needs to be identify partnerships and cost sharing opportunities because we're not going to go at this alone. And so that goes to my other comment in terms of bringing this forward for further community engagement. And I think it's just really important that we are clear on what those trade-offs are. And I know in the staff report, it does say that a key focus will be to collect community perspectives on funding approaches, assessing the value, the cost benefits of channel maintenance. I think I will go out on a limb and say I am very hesitant to put any taxation dollars towards this. Definitely not on the capital and maybe a small amount on the maintenance when we see the economic development report come forward in 2024 on the marine sector. But to me, this is not somewhere where general taxation dollars should be going. And so it is a question to the user groups how they want to be funding that, whether it's through user fees, whether through it's a parcel tax. And I will, following our comments, test a motion on ensuring we have increased advocacy on this matter to upper levels of government. But this is not somewhere where I think we can put our stretched tax dollars at this point. So I will make that clear from my perspective early on in this process. And there was another line in the report that jumped out at me that there's been increased increased uses of the Mamquam line channel, particularly through WLNG. And so that's another one where I think there's an opportunity for more partners to come to the table in terms of, we know there's ongoing discussions there and they're increasing their activity. So they should be coming to the table with some dollars to reflect that. Thank you.
Thanks. Some of my own thoughts on the principles. You know, I'm happy to see the environmental focus there. To my mind, though, we need to look beyond just the environmental impacts in the Mamquam blind channel. The more we do there, it is the access point to the rest of the sound, and so the more that can happen there, the more that happens in the rest of the sound. And so I think we have to be, from our perspective, really mindful of what we're enabling in the whole sound. And for me, there are some maybe reasonable or important constraints to keep in the sound or in the channel for that reason. Somewhat along the same lines, I am hesitant to get too excited about disposal at sea and some of the disposal options for contaminated waste, even on land. I think I would like us to be mindful of the impacts of that waste, and no matter where it goes, and not just assume, well, if we can get it out of our jurisdiction, it's not our problem. I think we do need to take responsibility for that waste, or assume some level of responsibility. And what that looks like exactly, I'm not sure what that means, but you know, I don't want to create a contaminated waste problem for someone else, really. I think, you know, and maybe it's a misinterpretation, but the sense I get is that so far some of the environmental groups have been a little less involved in some of the engagement. And in my mind, it might be useful to more proactively engage them now, just to, because it seems like if we fail to do that and then we get to the last minute and then they sort of, all this phrases in their consciousness, it may become a big deal. And so people are on board earlier. Maybe it's an easier process for everyone. And maybe I'm just misunderstanding their level of engagement so far. So I don't want to assume too much there. I have a bit of a different perspective on the wood fiber. I am hesitant to do anything that facilitates fossil projects in this. We're in a climate crisis and so on. And so for me, yeah, that's not a reason why I would like to be putting work or effort or resources to facilitate that sort of development, even if it's not in the channel directly. Costing, the options right now, I'm sort of leaning towards C, but probably B. I guess I have some affinity for C, but realistically C and or B. And what's I guess what's got me on the fence is one, the cost of C and the rest of our pressures, but also thinking about what sorts of activities, to my earlier comment, C versus B enables. And, to the degree we are facilitating, sailboats and environmental research and low impact tourism and education, all those sorts of things, like those are really big wins for the community and community access. But if it's like mega party yachts and big weight race boats and so on, which I don't think is what we're talking about here really, but that's sort of those sorts of uses actually really shift where my preference goes. And so I think, being thoughtful about those things. And then finally, the one thing that I think it's worth exploring all the funding options. I did wonder, is it useful for us to make a funding commitment of, we will commit to X million or X $100,000, and we'll just leave it up to the private sector to figure out the rest. And when you hit that number, then we'll go. And so we commit our piece, and is that a way to move forward? And so at least the rest of the folks have a commitment from us and can build around that. So that's my comments. Someone want to make them, or actually I should ask, so staff, is there clarity there? Is there more you would like, or?
Thank you so much to all of council for your comments. Everything was really clear. I just wanted to highlight to one point just for clarification around the environmental folks that have been stewardship groups that have been involved in the project to date. So on our working group, we do have Squamish Environment Society and Squamish River Watershed Society. Invitation went out to all three, including Squamish Streamkeepers, but we couldn't pull anyone in. And there is opportunity to do direct outreach and like go to a board meeting or go to a session and then send information out. So beyond the representative from those groups that have been engaged with us, we can definitely do more there. Other than that, you guys can carry on for sure, just around the recommendation if you like.
Okay, so seeing Mayor Herford, are you wanting to move that?
Yeah, thank you. I was going to move the staff recommendation, but at the end where it says as follows, I'll say as discussed to capture the comments that we made earlier. And I'll move both sections of the motion.
Okay, Councillor Starr, do I see a second? Or okay, Councillor Anderson, second. Okay,
I'll speak briefly if I could. Yeah, I won't go through my comments again. But as the conversation went around in that last round of comments, I'm thinking about public engagement and the need to understand the context of this work and the broader work that we're doing. During the time of engagement is also time to, we'll be looking to engage on budget, and I think some coordination there will be important to build that context, as nothing we do happens in a silo. And I think there's an opportunity there when we're engaging the public, as I'm sure you found. My experience has been that you go on one engagement mission and the conversation tends to wander to the other areas of interest. I think it's important that we tie our budget process in there and as well to help with that context and trade-off building. But I'm happy to see this, and I'm curious to see what the broader community has to say about this work going forward. So thank you.
Councillor Anderson.
I think one of the more valuable aspects of the report before us is the description of the collaboration example in the Fraser River between federal agencies, Port Metro Vancouver, Fraser, they always change their name, don't they, every decade, and Delta and Richmond. For us as elected councillors, I think we should be keeping an ongoing active lookout for advocacy opportunities, especially vis-a-vis the federal government. And when we have this marine impact study that might be completed over the next year, this will give us more information and also give us more clarity as to what's at stake, not only today, but in the future. So that's a separate assignment for us, in addition to what staff are doing and pointing out this very valuable collaboration example from the Fraser River. Thank you.
Councillor French.
Thanks, Chair. Just speaking in support of the motion, this particular issue gets a lot of talk, a lot of talk, and not a lot of action. And when action was taking place, it was primarily courtesy of Interfor and the various sawmill operators before them, and the chemical plant operators, which really focused early dredging efforts on the southern end of the channel. And we all know all of those industry operators have been gone for a long time. So it's great that we're putting more talk at this thing. And where I see this talk actually taking us, though, is some action, hopefully, in the near future.
Thanks. Just adding my own comments and taking the opportunity to finish off a point I forgot. For me, putting some tax dollars towards ongoing funding isn't necessarily out of the question. I think the split there is, like other recreation, how accessible is it to the broad community as opposed to a very small subset? And so putting it in that sort of perspective, the other things in terms of recreation and outdoor access and all that, finding some balance there makes it a little more palatable to put tax dollars towards it. And so that maybe also speaks to what sorts of uses are we trying to facilitate with how we go forward. But with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion carries unanimously. And Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. I'd also like to propose the following motion: that the mayor write a letter to MP Weiler, DFO, Transport Canada, and the BC Ministry of Water, Lands and Resource Stewardship on the challenges of local dredging and the need for dedicated funding for secondary channel maintenance. If it's seconded, I'll speak to it.
Okay, Mayor Herford, I'm seeing a second. Please go ahead, Councillor Stoner.
Yeah, thanks. I want to thank staff for preempting my question about how we actually advance advocacy on this file, given my earlier comments that I really don't think that this is something that municipal governments should actually be dealing with. Our best way forward is to take on our advocacy hats and move this forward. And I think thanks to your recommendations, focusing that with our MP and the federal government is a good starting point. I've also added the BC Ministry of no longer Forest Lands, Natural Resources, Walrus, Water, Lands, Resource Stewardship, because they currently have an intentions paper out on a coastal marine strategy for BC. And so I think that there is potentially some synergies there with Minister Cullen. And yeah, look forward to supporting the mayor with any of that if need be. Thanks.
Mayor Herford.
Just happy to take this on. Earlier in my comments, I spoke to appreciating staff and highlighting this gap, and absolutely happy to take up the torch on that and see what we can accomplish and what partnerships we can realize through this work. So happy to do that. Thank you.
And Councillor Anderson, did I see a hand? Go ahead.
Yes, speaking in support of the motion, and I do welcome the inclusion of Councillor Stoner's inclusion of the province. For the reason that it's provincial tenures water lots that are involved here. And back when the Squamish Nation was trying to address Squamish estuary issues a few years ago, they were told by multiple levels of Flynn Road that it would take well over a year to get a permitting application process going. So it's in the coastal marine strategy, unfortunately, has very little to say about things like navigation channels. It's on other themes, but the fact of their tenures and their permitting process very relevant to us. It's very important. Thank you.
Okay, not seeing any other hands, so with that, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. So do we need a couple minutes to, oh no, I see Mr. Bragg is here. So I'll just give people 30 seconds to exit. Okay, so it looks like we're ready to go to Mr. Bragg for the Public Works Facility Update memo.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me? Perfect. I'll share my screen. One moment here. All right, is that working? Okay, 1 second.
That's got it.
Perfect. Thank you for your time this afternoon. My name is Cal Bragg. I'm the Director of Facilities Planning and Construction. This is a memo to Council on the Public Works Facility Project, and it's an overview update. The objective is to provide an update, and it's also a snapshot of where we are right now. There's a lot of moving parts, and the project is moving quite quickly at the moment. So it's literally just a quick snapshot of where we're sitting at the moment. A little bit of background before we go in a little bit further here. This is one of 3 priority projects. The Real Estate Facilities Master Plan prioritised all the facilities, and it did it in 3 ways. The first was as being a critical one, the second was being a core project, and the third being support. This one falls in the first, the critical ones, which is it went with the fire halls, the municipal offices, the public works facility, which is this one, and dikes. And what this does is provide essential services to the community. The core projects examples are Brennan Park and the library, and support projects are facilities such as arts, childcare, and affordable housing. The project or the design started in 2021. Since then, we've gone through COVID. There's been significant increases in the construction costs and overall project costs. Initially, the plans were an allowance to build now to mitigate future expansion. The project at the moment sits at $37 million as a budget, and that was approved in the first quarter of this year. And currently, staff are working with the project team to constantly reduce costs. And this is called a value engineering process, where we look at the square feet and the design, and we've put a lot of focus on reducing the costs in this project. Staff are also looked at increasing the whole site, so it sits above the flood construction level. And the current works at the moment, as noted, there's a lot of change going on, and the focus right now is to get that budget down below $37 million. We're pausing the project to allow design review. And a point of note is the construction costs have stabilised. So the escalation has actually stabilised. There still is escalation there, but we're seeing standard escalation, not COVID level escalation. Just an overview of the project here, and as noted, we're moving pretty quickly. And this is one example of the design where we're sitting currently. So the project, or the actual whole yard here, or the project is made up of 4 areas. One is the office space. The other is the supporting infrastructure, which includes the change rooms, the washrooms, dry rooms, and staff areas, and that's supporting the maintenance bays. We've also got the maintenance bays, which is the core focus of this facility. Excuse me, and then we've also got the yard space. At the moment, there's a redesign on the building itself, and the focus right now is retaining function whilst we're reducing costs. The way that the project team has done this is by reducing office square feet primarily. Also looking at changing the exterior finishes, where previously we looked at having a different finish for the office and a different finish for the maintenance bays, whereas now we have a uniform finish. Looking at creating a frame, which is a prefabricated frame that we had for the maintenance bays, and extending that into the maintenance frame. Reducing sustainability levels. What this does is reduce costs. It also still meets BC build code, but it's one area to reduce costs. And also not building the future expansion now, but allowing the plan to have that as an option for future down the track. And just a point of note here that the maintenance bays and the supporting infrastructure are a core function and remain similar to the initial design. There's also a focus on the yard design currently. The office right now is, we've changed it to create it and push it above the flood construction level. Initially, the maintenance bays were below that, but we're now looking at actually increasing that and having it all at or close to flood construction level. This does have an impact to the project, which means there's reduced yard space and turning circles, so the vehicles are a little bit tighter. There's the addition of ramps, there is some reduced parking, and we've also got increased costs, and this is due to the additional soil on the walls and the utilities required to build out the facility. The new target cost estimate the project team's working to is $32 million, which is a reduction from $37 million. Staff alternatively or like looked at alternative sites, and there was around 13 sites that we looked at, and this included both government and non-government. It was district-owned sites, it was privately owned sites, it was private sites to purchase, sites to if we can partner up with as well. And the conclusions that staff came to is there's no or not much district land available to suit the size and the location required. And if you look at the existing location, it services the community in the north and south very well. Any purchase would be around a plus or minus $6 million cost to the district if we had to acquire new land, and that's at current market prices. Any new site that would buy most likely would require additional work to bring it up to flood construction level as well. And looking at an offset here, if we could subdivide the current site to offset the costs for purchasing another site, we can't do that because of the encumbrances on the existing site. There's a sponsored Crown grant condition there at the moment. So the next steps that staff are working on is the next month we'll be completing the current plan update. We're also reviewing the unknowns to meet the floodplain management bylaw, which is bringing it up to flood construction level. Coming back towards the end of the year for the issue for tender plan set, and what that is means we've got enough information that we can go out to market and get a realistic price. At the moment, we're at around about a Class D estimate, whereas that'll bring us into a Class A. And then in the first quarter of next year, the focus is coming back to council to state what the final estimate will be, which is the Class A, and then starting construction.
Thank you. I'll go to Mayor Herford.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for all your work on this. I had a question around earlier in the process when we were looking at different designs and like going back quite a ways. I had some questions around sort of how we were deciding what right sizing was. So we make sure that we're not at capacity on day one, but we're not building something that we need to double our population before we're at the sweet spot with it. And the answers there at that point were kind of nebulous. And it seems like this work has progressed to understand that better. So could you speak to the reduction of space and what the future add-on is, and sort of some ballparks around, if you can, around timing or population growth, or when that additional capacity would be needed, so we can understand how far we're getting with this major investment?
Yeah, through yourself. The focus here is to keep the maintenance base exactly the same as what we had initially. It's a core function here. And we've looked at other public works facilities. We looked at Miller Capilano. We've done a lot of research internally here to figure out what's required. So we know that there's no leverage there to reduce the size of the maintenance base. What we have looked at is reducing other areas, and so the supporting infrastructure really needs to remain the same size there, which is the washrooms and the dry bays and the staff area. So that area basically stayed the same. The areas we focused on is office, because what we had previously was some square footage to allow for some training rooms, to allow for future expansion. And what we've done is we've taken that out. As far as the square foot goes, it's a bit of a moving goalpost at the moment, and we'll have the plans back in about a month or so, like I said, in August, and we'll actually have those dedicated numbers here. But we're looking at taking that out in order to meet these reductions to keep the costs down here. The question of functionality is definitely there. It's in front of everyone's conversation, and that's with public work staff and also the designer. We know that the office is much bigger than what we're looking at currently. We do know, as noted, that the maintenance bays are very comfortable as far as sizing and design goes. So as far as specific numbers, we'll have that in about a month, but that's our focus, which is to keep the maintenance bays the same size, but with a reduction focus in the office area.
So I guess just follow up on that, maybe what's the sort of criteria, I guess, if you think about that from a capacity perspective, like how far can we shrink? Are we looking at something I'm just trying to understand how far we're getting or we're striving to get. I get that there's a reduction of as much as possible, but I'm hoping we're not going through this process just to meet the requirements that exist today, because we know our current facility isn't there. So could you speak to the difference between, today's requirements and whatever that point in the future is, and just how much capacity will we gain here, and how, I want to make sure we're not cutting back too far in the name of at this point in time, so that we're getting something that does serve us into the future. And anything you could do to help with that context at this point, I would find helpful.
So we know there's 60 to 66 staff at the moment, and creating an office space for that with the maintenance base and supporting infrastructure, there's generic numbers that we're working to, and we know that works. What we also know or have an allowance for is if we have the office space, the way that the structure goes with the prefabricated frame, and this is, we're looking at this at the moment, we don't want to, paint ourselves in a corner by creating a building that can't allow for any future expansion. It is a finite site, and we know that. But what we can also do is go up in certain areas and allow areas on site that we can expand. So, for example, when we have the steel frame, we can possibly allow for having another level on top if we increase the footing size. And we're just going through that role at the moment to make sure that we build this building and we literally don't get painted into a corner here, or we can't have any expansion, say in 10 or 20 years' time.
Thank you,
Ms. Glende.
Thank you. And further to what Mr. Bragg has outlined, the office space is really the only component of this building that could be flexible in terms of other locations in the district, whereas maintenance bays, washrooms, staff change rooms, et cetera, must be on the site. But as we grow and if more administrative staff or more office space is needed, there is an opportunity as we build out more facilities to leverage combining office space in other location, which is part of the rationale as well.
Councillor Anderson.
Last winter, I had the opportunity with a couple of my colleagues to visit GFL on the occasion of they're introducing the new electric truck. And I got the impression that they had a lot of learning regarding the space constraints and the design constraints for electric trucks. And are we taking this into account in the maintenance space that we're designing here, future electric vehicles, electric trucks?
Through the chair, yes, we are. We have an allowance. To start off with, we need to have enough electricity coming into the site to service that in the future for charging and also just generally for operations here. We have a minimum amount of parking allowance for electrification. We've also looked at allowing electrification within the maintenance bays. Knowing that when you service a petrol or a gas or a diesel vehicle, it's different than the electrical vehicle. So that's all taken into account in design there. The actual end impact, we don't know. We'll be working through that. But for example, we've allowed, additional piping for electrification, knowing that if there is further cables that need to come in there. And that's the actual electrification of the building. But your question was the servicing of the vehicles. We don't know the end result, but we've allowed for as much as we possibly can at the moment.
So I had Councillor Hamilton. Okay. A couple questions. I guess I have been trying to wrap my head around the cost versus what we've seen compared to fire halls, especially Tantalus Fire Hall. And I know it's a completely different purpose and so on, but it seems a key difference between the two is that there's a lot more land prep and unanticipated land cost here. Is there a way, or how we sort of separated out, like this is the cost of the building and the escalation there, and we can sort of compare, contrast that meaningfully to fire halls just to wrap our heads around it. And then the sort of land piece is unique, and that's a separate piece, and we can put a number on that and understand that's kind of the outlier in this situation. Is there a way we can kind of, and maybe today isn't the time to get that information, but just information we could see at a future date to just kind of wrap our heads around this cost?
Through the chair, yes. We'll have a definitive cost of going up to flood construction level, and we'll have a breakdown of everything else. So to answer your question, yes, we'll know what those costs are.
Okay, thank you. And I'm just wondering if we can dig into, we talked about cutting back on some of the sustainability things. Are these things, I'm just wondering if you can be a bit more specific about what those are, and are these things that we can deal with later, like adding more insulation, improving windows later, or are these fundamental things where we don't do it now, we just don't do it until the next building?
Through the chair, yeah, this is a difficult area. Sustainability costs money. And what one of the examples we've looked at is we had R60 walls before and reducing that to, I can't remember the number, it would be about the R25 kind of number. There'll be a different type of window, there will be a different type of roofing. At the end of the day, for us to reduce budget, then sustainability must be dived into. And again, are we painting ourselves into a corner for the future? Yes, somewhat. You can't just go back and reclad a building easily. Once we jump into sustainability, you really want to design it in from the get-go.
Okay, and will we get an understanding at any point, or have an opportunity to understand, we're saving some capital costs now, but we're increasing our operational costs because it's going to be a lot more heating, a lot more cooling, and so on and so forth. And so at 10 years, we've lost the capital savings and we're starting to lose money. Or is there any way to have a sense of that?
Through the chair, there is, and we can actually get that specific number. But when you look at the operations of a building, that the doors open and close a significant amount, even more so than a fire hall. They're not exactly a very sustainable building. I'm talking about the maintenance bays. They're not very sustainable from the get-go, even if you make a thermos and you design it well. So, if any building is in our facilities that we're constructing that we're going to have some relaxation on sustainability, this is a good one. The other flip side of the coin here is when we're looking at, say, Brennan Park, where all the grants are focused on sustainability, it is the building that's costing us the most in GHGs of any facility. We're looking at this from an overview as well and saying maybe we perhaps focus higher on sustainability for the Brennan Parks. And when we have a building, the doors open and shut so significantly, it's very difficult to reduce the GHGs there.
Okay, and just one final thing, and it's sort of a comment/question, I guess. Are we still looking, hopefully, at fossil-free energy, regardless of whatever other sustainability measures we're cutting?
Through the chair, we've taken a black and white ruling based on our bylaw and where we're sitting that we electrify all our new construction.
It's good to hear from me, at least. Thank you. Councillor Hamilton.
Thanks very much. And thank you for all your work on this. I'm sure this is an enormous file for you. And you're working hard to reduce the costs. I'm still struggling, and I've been struggling with this for a while, to really understand the cost because we're still coming in at around $1,000 a square foot, when compared to tilt up. And I spoke to some folks, and prices for the tilt ups going up in the industrial park are in around the $500 a square foot. I don't understand, and maybe it's something I don't understand about this building, but I don't understand what's fundamentally different in our public works maintenance bays and office spaces and tilt ups going up in the industrial park right now. Can you help me understand what's costing us double?
Yeah, I think there needs to be a look at the definition of what the cost per square foot is. If you talk to an architect or a builder, we need a baseline from that one. So when you're talking $500 a square foot, it may be just construction only. What we're looking at is a total project cost. So it's got our internal costs, it's got insurances, it's got all the soft costs, it's got absolutely everything in there, and that's our final cost. So I just want to clarify that point. The other thing here is we did look at the difference between tilt up and prefabricated steel. And the team noted that prefabricated steel, and this is basically the cheapest way that we can possibly frame this and build this building for what it is. It is cheaper than doing tilt up for what we looked at.
Thanks. And my second question is about the consideration of other sites. Thank you for noting the constraints. As I look through the constraints, though, I look at lot 38. It's 1 kilometer, less than a kilometer away. It is roughly the same size. It's 1.7 hectares. The build site for the public works is about 1.5 hectares. And this is where tilt ups are going in at that $500 a square foot sort of level. So maybe there's something I'm not thinking about properly with this 500 square foot. Maybe I misunderstand something there. But what was it about lot 38 that caused it to fail the criteria a site as an option?
Through the chair, I need to get that information up to dive into a little bit further. But talking through real estate here, there's a few items and options beyond even what I said there. We've got some zoning issues, we've got environmental issues, we've got there was lease issues, there was a few other issues on all these sites that we found that we couldn't go through. So specifically in lot 38, I'll have to get that information for you. I don't have it at hand in front of me.
Thanks very much.
Just have one more question for myself. There's been discussion of, some of the potential extra office space we've been conceiving here. Maybe we could accommodate that on other land, but at the same time, this is grant land, and so we do have flood construction level issues to deal with, but it's also grant land, and so I guess I assume we've done that analysis, or how confident are we that, all things considered and considering the price of land in other places, maybe this is the place, despite the cost, to put extra office space? Are we sort of confident that this is not the place, or are we still evaluating that?
Through the chair, we're confident this land is the best land that we can build out on.
Councillor Stoner.
Thank you. Through the chair. Mr. Bragg, can you remind me, was this an IPD project, or have we just kind of been going at this one step at a time?
Through the chair, one step at a time, or construction management for the proper terminology there. It's not IPD.
Thank you for updating my terminology. Okay, and then just looking at next steps here. So appreciate the ongoing work in terms of refining the proposal that's in front of us. And you say this will return to council Q1 2024 with a Class A price. I feel like there are still you're still doing really important work in terms of balancing a bunch of these things, but I think that there are some important questions that have been raised today and through your presentation with regards to decisions about whether it's worth investing. I don't know how much it's going to cost to increase the office space to a sustainability standard of X. And so I'm just wondering, are we past the point of having that conversation? Is that coming back to council, or is the boat kind of gone on that one?
Through the chair, that's a good question. To put a price on sustainability is quite difficult. It's not a black and white thing where we come back and say, if we do X amount, it's going to cost this, because it's kind of variable. I can come back and do a mid-report, and I think that'll give us a bit of an indication and some options as well. Perhaps that could be the best way.
Yeah, and I'm thinking it's not just the sustainability factor. It's this piece of how much do we build out now in terms of future-proofing this building versus build out later, and what the trade-offs are on that. And I know that this is maybe a reflection of when this came for the budget amendment. I was definitely hesitant to put in the 37 million, and my comments were that it was contingent on understanding what the trade-offs were going to be when the final dollar came down to it. And so I'm just curious. I think my reservation is if we push far ahead enough on a Class A estimate, then are we really committed at that point for some of these points that I feel like there are still trade-offs to be discussed? Does that make sense?
Through the chair, it does. I'll discuss with staff and come back to you on that one.
Okay, thank you. And then just finally, I just want to make sure, now that we're raising the whole site to flood construction level, that doesn't have any impact on the floodwater conveyance expectation for that property. And I think it's Government Road that ends up being the primary floodwater pathway, but if we raise the whole site, does it have any knock-on effects as opposed to just elevating a portion thereof?
Through the chair, we don't think so. The way that the flood reports were initially done back in the day when they were working on the bylaw for flood here, it would have taken into account, but we'll dive in a little bit further. We don't anticipate any incendiary issues surrounding the site from raising it.
Okay, so there have been some comments and questions. We just have a motion to receive. It sounds like, if I'm hearing correctly, Mr. Bragg, you'd like to proceed with that motion as opposed to having council make any official comments, and there will be maybe another report at sometime in September, October before the Class A estimate. Is that a reasonable summary?
Through the chair, I'll resolve with staff for that, but from my side, it seems reasonable. Yes.
Okay, Councillor French, are you moving? Is there a seconder? Councillor Stoner seconds. Any discussion? Seeing none, I will call to question. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? No one's opposed. Motion carries. Thank you very much. And with that, I am looking for a motion to close. Mayor Herford seconds, Councillor Greenlaw, Mayor Herford moves, Councillor Greenlaw seconds. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? No one opposed.